The October night air carried that unmistakable Pennsylvania chill, the kind that settled into bones and whispered of winter's approach. Marcus Webb's 2004 Ford pickup shuddered to a stop at the Hillcrest gas station, its engine giving one last metallic cough before falling silent. The red neon sign above flickered against the darkness, casting harsh shadows across weathered hands that gripped the steering wheel with the weariness of a 12-hour shift. 11:47 p.m. The dashboard clock glowed green, marking another day that had stretched too long and paid too little. Marcus climbed out, his work boots crunching against loose gravel. The ironwood steel uniform clung to his frame, stained with sweat and metal dust from another endless shift welding pipe joints in the fabrication bay. $43.17 sat in his wallet. Between him and the eviction notice that would arrive if he missed another rent payment stood exactly one paycheck. And that check wouldn't clear for 3 more days. The gas nozzle felt cold in his palm as he unscrewed the cap. His mind drifted home, to the stack of bills waiting on the kitchen counter like patient vultures. The medical one sat on top, always on top. Isaiah's cardiology appointment was in 7 minutes at County Hospital, the one that would determine whether his 8-year-old son's heart could wait another month, or whether the surgery would have to happen now, ready or not, paid for or not. A sound cut through the night, sharp, desperate, wrong. Marcus froze, the nozzle halfway to the tank. That wasn't the typical gas station noise. Not a car door or someone dropping change or teenagers playing music too loud. This was a woman's cry, choked off mid-scream, followed by the unmistakable sounds of struggle coming from behind the station where the dumpsters sat shrouded in shadow. 20 years of civilian life hadn't dulled the combat instincts. His body knew that sound, recognized the frequency of genuine terror versus drunken argument or lover's spat. Someone needed help. Real help. The kind that wouldn't wait for police to arrive in 15 minutes. The smart play was obvious. Get in the truck. Drive to the hospital. Isaiah was waiting. The appointment wouldn't reschedule easily, and Dr. Ramesh had made it clear that time wasn't on their side. His son's damaged mitral valve was deteriorating faster than anyone had anticipated. Sarah's voice echoed in his memory, soft but certain, the way she'd sounded in those final weeks when cancer had stolen everything but her clarity. Don't let the grief make you hard, Marcus. Don't let losing me turn you into someone who walks past people who need help. The third promise, the one he'd struggled with most. Marcus set down the nozzle and moved toward the corner of the building, staying low, keeping to shadows. His phone stayed in his pocket. Whatever was happening back there, it was happening now. The military training took over, muscle memory from a life he'd left behind. Assess, decide, act. No hesitation. He rounded the corner, and the scene crystallized with terrible clarity. 3 men in dark clothing surrounded a woman, dragging her toward a black panel van with its side door gaping open like a mouth. She fought with surprising strength, her designer coat torn at the shoulder, long dark hair whipping as she twisted against their grip. One man had her arms pinned behind her back. Another fumbled with duct tape, trying to secure it over her mouth. The third, a hulking figure with a neck tattoo of barbed wire, controlled her kicking legs with practiced efficiency. "Stop fighting, princess." The largest man's voice carried cruel amusement. "Nobody's coming to help you. Nobody ever does." Marcus's mind calculated odds and angles. 3 against 1. Poor lighting. Unknown if they were armed beyond what he could see. Every rational thought screamed to retreat. Call 911, let trained professionals handle it. But the woman's eyes found him in the darkness, wide with terror and sudden desperate hope. Some decisions happen in the space between heartbeats, when there's no time for debate, only action. Don't move. The words came out low and dangerous, carrying the authority of someone who'd commanded others in worse situations than this. All four figures froze. The woman's gaze locked onto Marcus with an intensity that felt like electricity. The kidnappers turned, assessing this new variable in their carefully planned operation. The leader straightened, revealing a frame that topped Marcus's 6 feet by several inches. Built like a linebacker, with the casual confidence of someone who'd won every physical confrontation through sheer mass. Walk away, friend. The threat underneath was clear. This isn't your problem. Marcus stepped forward into the pool of security light mounted on the building's corner. The woman's expression shifted from hope to something more complex. Guilt, maybe, or fear that he'd die trying to save her. The lady doesn't seem to agree with you. The second man, wiry with nervous energy, laughed without humor. You got a death wish or something? There's 3 of us and 1 of you. I never was good at math. Marcus's eyes never left the leader as he took another deliberate step closer. The years at the steel mill had kept him strong. 20-hour shifts hauling pipe and operating heavy machinery built a different kind of strength than gym workouts. The functional power of someone whose body was a tool, not a display. But these men were professionals. The way they'd positioned themselves, the efficiency of their attack, the van already running, this was planned, rehearsed, executed. The big man's hand moved toward his jacket pocket. Metal glinted in the weak light. A knife. Maybe worse. Final warning! His voice dropped to a growl. Walk away now, and you get to go home tonight. Time slowed to that crystalline clarity Marcus remembered from firefights overseas, when the world narrowed to essential information and the body moved before the mind finished thinking. Threats, distances, angles of attack, the woman's position, the van's engine idling, the knife clearing its sheath. Not happening. The leader came fast, blade catching the security light, but Marcus was already moving, closing the distance before the knife fully cleared its sheath, driving his shoulder into the man's midsection with the full weight of his momentum. They crashed into the van's side with a metallic boom that echoed across the empty parking lot. The knife clattered away across asphalt, spinning into darkness. The wiry one came next, throwing wild punches that Marcus deflected with movements drilled into muscle memory during basic training 20 years ago. A quick strike to the solar plexus doubled the attacker over, gasping for breath that wouldn't come. The third man grabbed a tire iron from inside the van, swinging it in a vicious arc that would have caved in Marcus's skull if it connected. Marcus's sidestep caught the man's wrist mid-swing, twisting until the weapon fell free. A knee to the ribs sent him stumbling backward into the dumpster with a crash that reverberated through the night. Pain exploded in Marcus's shoulder as the leader recovered, delivering a punch that felt like a sledgehammer. The world tilted. His knees threatened to buckle, but he'd taken worse hits before, absorbed more pain, kept moving when his body screamed to stop. The military had taught him that. Isaiah's needs had reinforced it. The leader's hand closed around the fallen tire iron. His eyes held the cold calculation of someone deciding whether to kill or merely maim. Then the woman moved. She'd freed herself during the chaos, grabbing a broken 2x4 from beside the dumpster. The board connected with the leader's knee with a crack that made Marcus wince. The big man howled, dropping the tire iron, clutching his leg. Move it! The leader's command cut through his pain. The wiry one helped the third attacker up from beside the dumpster. They scrambled toward the van, helping each other inside. The engine roared to life, tires squealing as they peeled away from the gas station, leaving only the smell of burnt rubber and the echo of violence. Marcus memorized the license plate by reflex, though he suspected it would lead nowhere useful. Professional kidnappers didn't use registered vehicles. The woman stood frozen against the station wall, the 2x4 still clutched in white-knuckled hands. Now that the immediate danger had passed, Marcus could see her more clearly. Early 30s, dressed in clothes that had once been expensive but were now torn and dirty. A bruise was forming on her left cheek where one of the attackers had struck her. But her eyes remained alert, watching him with a mixture of gratitude and calculation. "You all right?" Marcus kept his distance, understanding that after trauma, some people needed space. "Thank you." Her voice carried the cultured tones of good schools and better neighborhoods, the kind of education that cost more than Marcus earned in a year. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't—" She stopped, unable to voice the alternative. "We should call the police." Marcus pulled out his phone, already calculating how much this would delay getting to the hospital. Isaiah would be worried. The appointment would be missed. Dr. Ramesh's schedule was packed for weeks. "No." The word burst from her with surprising force. Seeing his reaction, she modulated her tone. "I mean, yes, but can we go somewhere safe first? I don't think they've gone far." Something in her expression, fear layered over calculation, made Marcus pause. This wasn't just about the attack. There was more to the story, complications she hadn't yet revealed. "My truck's right out front." He gestured toward the parking lot. "I can take you to the police station in Millfield. It's about 10 minutes down the road." Relief washed over her face. That would be perfect. As they walked around to the front of the station, Marcus found himself studying her more carefully. Even disheveled and frightened, she carried herself with unconscious confidence, the bearing of someone accustomed to being in control. Not just beauty, though she was undeniably attractive, but an innate authority that seemed at odds with the vulnerability she'd just shown. "I'm Marcus, by the way. Marcus Webb." "Victoria." She settled into the passenger seat of his truck, pulling the door closed with hands that still trembled slightly. After a brief hesitation, she added, "Victoria Winters." The name didn't register with Marcus, but something in her delivery, a slight pause as if waiting for recognition, made him file it away for later consideration. He paid for his gas, and they pulled out of the station, headlights cutting through the darkness as they descended the winding mountain road toward town. Marcus checked his mirrors constantly, making sure the black van wasn't following. His shoulder throbbed where the leader had landed that punch, but the pain was manageable, familiar. He'd worked through worse. The silence stretched between them until Victoria finally spoke. "You didn't hesitate back there." Most people would have hidden and called for help. Marcus kept his eyes on the road. "I've seen what happens when good people do nothing." "Military?" "Army. 4 tours overseas." He didn't elaborate. Those years were behind him, boxed up and stored away like Sarah's winter clothes, present but not requiring daily examination. Victoria nodded as if this explained everything, which perhaps it did. They drove the rest of the way in silence, both processing what had just happened and what might come next. The Millfield police station occupied a modest brick building on Maple Street, sandwiched between a hardware store that had been family-owned for 3 generations and a diner serving the same menu since before Marcus was born. At nearly midnight, only 2 patrol cars sat in the small parking lot, their presence a modest reassurance that help was available even at this hour. Marcus parked under a street light and walked around to open Victoria's door, a habit ingrained by Sarah, who had always insisted that manners mattered regardless of circumstances or fatigue. Inside, Officer Maria Diaz took their statements with the thoroughness of someone who had seen enough violence to take every report seriously. She photographed Victoria's bruises, collected Marcus's description of the attackers, and put out a bolo alert for the black van, though all three of them understood the kidnappers were likely miles away by now, changing vehicles, destroying evidence, disappearing into whatever criminal network had hired them. "You should go to the hospital," Diaz told Victoria, noting the bruise darkening on her cheek. "Get checked out properly. Head injuries can be deceptive." Victoria shook her head. "I'm fine, really. Just shaken." "Do you have somewhere safe to stay tonight? Family nearby? A hotel?" For the first time since the attack, Victoria looked genuinely uncertain. She glanced at Marcus, then back at the officer. "I was staying at the Grandview Inn, up Route 19. Diaz frowned. "The Grandview's been closed for renovations for over 2 months. The silence stretched uncomfortably. Victoria's cheeks flushed slightly, as if she'd been caught in a lie she hadn't intended to tell. "I'm sorry, I misspoke. I meant the Pine Lodge near the interstate." Officer Diaz nodded, though her expression suggested she wasn't entirely convinced. Marcus had been quiet during most of the interview, but something about the exchange bothered him. The Pine Lodge was a truck stop motel, the kind of place that rented rooms by the hour as often as by the night. It didn't match Victoria's expensive clothes or cultured accent. It didn't align with the woman he'd pulled from those kidnappers. As they finished at the station, Diaz handed each of them her card. "Call if you remember anything else about those men, or if you see that van again. And Ms. Winters, please reconsider the hospital." Outside in the parking lot, Victoria stood beside Marcus's truck, looking lost. The confidence she'd shown inside the station seemed to evaporate in the cool night air. For the first time, she appeared as vulnerable as she must have felt. "You don't really want to go to that motel." It wasn't a question. Victoria sighed, her breath visible in the October chill. "No, I don't. But I don't have many options at midnight in a town I don't know." Marcus heard himself making the offer before his rational mind could argue against it. "You could stay at my place. I have a guest room. My son Isaiah stays with me, so it's properly set up. You'd be safe, and we could figure out better accommodations in the morning." Victoria studied his face in the dim streetlight, looking for angles, for ulterior motives, for the catch that always accompanied such offers in her experience. "You don't know anything about me. I could be dangerous." Marcus almost smiled at that. "Lady, I just watched you fight off 3 kidnappers while wearing heels. If you were dangerous, I think I'd have figured it out by now." Something in his tone made her relax slightly. "Isaiah, that's your son?" 8 years old. He's with his aunt this week, but she'll bring him back tomorrow." Marcus opened the truck door for her. "Look, my place isn't fancy, but it's safe, and I make decent coffee." The drive to Marcus's house took them through the older part of Millfield, where Victorian homes sat on tree-lined streets and porch lights created pools of warm yellow light against the darkness. His home was a modest 2-story craftsman with a wraparound porch and a front yard that showed the careful attention of someone who took pride in maintaining what he had. Even in the dark, Victoria could see flower boxes under the windows and a vegetable garden along one side. "It's beautiful." The words came out genuine, surprised. "My wife's design." Marcus unlocked the front door. "Sarah. She had a gift for making places feel like home." The past tense hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. The interior lived up to the promise of the exterior. The living room was furnished with comfortable, well-maintained pieces that spoke of a family life built around warmth rather than showiness. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with a mixture of technical manuals, classic novels, and what looked like school reading assignments. Family photos covered the mantel above a stone fireplace, showing moments from a life that had clearly been rich in love, if not in money. "Have a seat." Marcus gestured toward the couch. "Tea? Coffee? Something stronger?" Tea would be wonderful. Victoria settled into the corner of the couch, pulling a handmade throw blanket around her shoulders. Some of the tension left her body for the first time in hours. While Marcus moved around the kitchen, she studied the photos more closely. Sarah had been beautiful in the way that came from inner contentment rather than perfect features. Dark skin, warm eyes, a smile that suggested she'd found genuine joy in simple things. Isaiah was a younger version of his father, with his mother's expressive eyes and intelligent face. But it was the pictures of Marcus that struck her most. Images of him in military uniform, looking serious and competent, mixed with candid shots of him laughing with his family, covered in flour from some long-ago baking project, or reading to a much younger Isaiah curled up in his lap. She died 2 years ago. Marcus returned with 2 mugs of tea, having noticed Victoria looking at the photos. Cancer. Fought it for 18 months before it finally won. I'm sorry. Victoria accepted the mug gratefully. The tea was Earl Grey, perfectly steeped. She looks like she was a wonderful person. The best person I ever knew. Marcus settled into the armchair across from her, close enough for conversation, but far enough to give her space. She could make anyone feel welcome within 10 minutes of meeting them. Had this way of seeing the good in people, even when they couldn't see it in themselves. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, both processing the events of the evening. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed once, marking the half-hour. Outside, the night sounds of suburbia provided a peaceful backdrop. A dog barking in the distance, the whisper of wind through leaves, an occasional car passing on the street. Can I ask you something? Victoria said finally. Marcus nodded. Why did you help me? I mean, really. You could have been killed. You missed whatever you were rushing to. Why risk all that for a stranger? Marcus considered the question seriously, because it deserved a serious answer. Because I couldn't live with myself if I hadn't. Sarah used to say that we're all responsible for each other, whether we want to be or not. That ignoring someone in trouble was just another way of causing harm. He paused. She made me promise before she died. 3 promises, actually. Take care of Isaiah. Don't let the grief make me hard, and don't be afraid to love again when the time came. The vulnerability in that admission hung in the air. That's a heavy responsibility. Maybe, but it's also what makes life worth living. He studied her face, seeing the calculation behind her eyes, the careful weighing of whether to trust him with truth. Can I ask you something now? She tensed slightly, but nodded. Those men tonight, they seemed to know you. Was this really a random attack? Victoria was quiet for a long moment, staring into her tea as if the answer might be floating there among the leaves. When she looked up, her eyes were troubled. It's complicated. Marcus almost smiled. Most things worth talking about are. She seemed to wrestle with herself, then made a decision. I'm not from around here. I was just passing through, and somehow they found me. I don't know how. It wasn't the whole truth. Marcus could see that clearly, could read it in her body language, in the way she didn't quite meet his eyes. But it wasn't entirely a lie either. She was scared of something bigger than 3 men with a van, something that had her looking over her shoulder and jumping at shadows. Well, you're safe now. He stood, collecting the empty mugs. Guest room's at the top of the stairs, first door on the right. There's towels in the bathroom across the hall. I'll leave some clothes outside the door in case you want to change. They were Sarah's. Might be a little big, but they're clean. Victoria stood, clutching the blanket around her shoulders. Thank you, Marcus. I don't know how to repay this kindness. Don't worry about repaying anything. Just get some rest. As she reached the stairs, she turned back. I meant what I said earlier. You didn't hesitate. That takes a special kind of person. No. Marcus began turning off the downstairs lights. It just takes someone who remembers we're all in this together. Upstairs, Victoria found the guest room exactly as promised. Clean, comfortable, and welcoming. The clothes Marcus had left were simple but good quality. A soft cotton nightgown and a robe that smelled faintly of lavender. As she changed, she caught sight of herself in the dresser mirror. The bruise on her cheek was darkening, her hair still disheveled from the struggle, but her eyes, which had been wide with fear for hours, finally looked calm. She slipped between clean sheets and closed her eyes, listening to the sounds of Marcus moving around downstairs, checking locks, turning off lights, settling the house for the night. For the first time in what seemed like forever, she felt truly safe. Not because of bodyguards or security systems or locked gates, but because of the simple kindness of a man who had done the right thing when it mattered. What she didn't know was that by helping her, Marcus had set in motion events that would change both their lives forever. And by morning, the quiet street where he'd lived peacefully for 15 years would become the center of attention for some very powerful people. Downstairs, Marcus stood at the kitchen window, looking out at the dark street. His shoulder still throbbed where the kidnapper had landed that punch. His phone showed 3 missed calls from County Hospital and a voicemail from Dr. Ramesh's office about rescheduling Isaiah's appointment. The bills on the counter hadn't gotten any smaller. Tomorrow he'd have to work a double shift to make up for the time he'd lose dealing with this situation. But when he thought about that moment at the gas station, about Victoria's eyes finding his in the darkness, about the choice between walking away and stepping forward, he knew he'd make the same decision again. Sarah's voice echoed in his memory, soft and certain. We're all responsible for each other. He touched the photo on the mantel. Sarah's smile frozen in happier times, before cancer, before loss. Before he'd learned that life could take everything you loved and leave you standing in the wreckage, trying to figure out how to keep breathing. I hope I made you proud tonight. His whisper barely disturbed the silence. Outside, a car drove slowly past the house, then another. Marcus watched their headlights sweep across the ceiling, noted their deliberate pace, the way they seemed to be searching for something, or someone. He checked the locks one more time before heading upstairs. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, its own decisions. But tonight, he'd saved someone who needed saving. And that had to count for something. It had to. The smell of bacon and coffee drifted up the stairs, pulling Victoria from the deepest sleep she'd had in months. Sunlight streamed through the guest room's curtains, casting everything in a warm, golden glow that made the previous night's terror feel almost like a bad dream. Almost. The bruise on her cheek, now a spectacular purple-blue in the morning light, served as a stark reminder that it had all been very real. She found the clothes Marcus had left outside her door, more of Sarah's things, jeans that fit reasonably well, though loose around the waist, a soft blue sweater that smelled faintly of lavender sachets, and clean undergarments still in their packages, the kind of thoughtful detail that spoke volumes about the man downstairs. The kitchen was clearly the heart of the home. Worn countertops spoke of years of family meals, a refrigerator covered in what looked like Isaiah's schoolwork and artwork, herbs growing in small pots on the windowsill. Marcus stood at the stove, already dressed for work in heavy canvas pants and steel-toed boots, the ironwood steel logo embroidered on his shirt pocket. "Morning." He looked up as she entered, his face creasing into a genuine smile that transformed his features from merely handsome to something warmer. "How'd you sleep?" Better than I have in ages. Victoria settled into one of the mismatched chairs around the kitchen table, watching him work with the efficient movements of someone who'd cooked countless breakfasts in this exact space. This smells amazing. He slid a plate in front of her, loaded with bacon, scrambled eggs, and toast. Sarah's recipe. She always said breakfast was the most important meal, not because of nutrition, but because it sets the tone for everything else. The eggs were fluffy and perfectly seasoned, the bacon crisp without being overdone. Victoria closed her eyes, savoring a meal prepared with care rather than hired help or restaurant efficiency. Your wife was a wise woman. She was that. Marcus poured coffee from a pot that had clearly been brewing since dawn, joining her at the table. I called Officer Diaz this morning. No sign of that ban yet, and they haven't had reports of similar incidents in the area. Something flickered across Victoria's face. Relief, maybe, or possibly disappointment. That's good, I suppose. You suppose? Marcus's tone suggested he'd noticed the hesitation. She stirred her coffee carefully, not meeting his eyes. I just wonder if they'll try again. Any particular reason they might? The question hung in the air between them. Victoria took another sip of coffee, clearly stalling for time. When she finally spoke, it was with the careful precision of someone choosing words very deliberately. Some people attract trouble without meaning to. I might be one of those people. Before Marcus could pursue that cryptic statement, the kitchen phone rang. He answered on the second ring, his voice taking on the slightly formal tone people use when talking to strangers. Webb residence? A pause, his expression shifting to confusion. No, I'm sorry, but I think you have the wrong number. There's no one here by that name. Another pause, this one longer. Yes, I'm sure. Have a good day. He hung up, frowning. Weird. Someone asking for a Miss Preston. Said they were from some kind of security company. Victoria's coffee cup froze halfway to her mouth. For just a moment, her carefully composed expression slipped, revealing something that looked almost like panic. But she recovered quickly, setting down the cup and reaching for her toast. Probably a wrong number, like you said. Probably. But Marcus filed the reaction away, along with the growing collection of small inconsistencies he'd noticed. The expensive manicure on hands that bore no calluses or signs of physical work. The way she held herself with unconscious confidence, as if accustomed to deference. The fact that she'd given Officer Diaz a fake hotel name without seeming to realize it. I should probably get going. Victoria glanced at the clock on the kitchen wall. I've imposed on your hospitality long enough, and I'm sure you need to get to work. Actually, I called in sick today. Marcus refilled her coffee cup without being asked. Figured after last night, we could both use a slower pace. Besides, where exactly are you planning to go? You still haven't told me what you were doing in Millfield in the first place. Victoria was quiet for a long moment, staring out the kitchen window at the backyard where a few late roses still bloomed despite the October chill. When she looked up, her eyes were troubled. I was supposed to meet someone. A business associate. They never showed up. What kind of business? Consulting work. The answer came too quickly, too smoothly rehearsed. I help companies streamline their operations. Marcus nodded, though something about the explanation didn't quite add up. Millfield wasn't exact. We understand you may have been involved in an incident last evening, and we'd like to discuss your ongoing safety requirements. Please call us at your earliest convenience at... Marcus hit the stop button, cutting off the message. He looked at Victoria, who had gone very pale. Miss Preston, I presume. She closed her eyes, and when she opened them again, they held a mixture of resignation and something that might have been relief. It's complicated. So you said last night. Marcus sat down across from her, his expression patient but expectant. I think maybe it's time for the uncomplicated version. Victoria stood abruptly, walking to the window and wrapping her arms around herself. For several minutes, she just stood there, looking out at the ordinary suburban backyard with its vegetable garden and tree swing. When she finally spoke, her voice was so quiet Marcus had to strain to hear. My real name is Victoria Winters. She turned back to face him, searching his expression for recognition. And last night, those men weren't trying to kidnap me for ransom. They were trying to stop me from disappearing. Disappearing from what? From a life that stopped feeling like mine about 5 years ago. Before Marcus could respond, the sound of vehicles pulling into his driveway cut through the morning quiet. Not one car, but several, their engines purring with the expensive precision of German engineering. Victoria's face went white as she looked out the front window. They found me. Marcus joined her, taking in the scene. 3 black SUVs sat in his driveway, their tinted windows reflecting the morning sun like mirrors. Men in dark suits were climbing out, their movements coordinated and professional. These weren't the same men from the gas station. These were security professionals, the kind who wore earpieces and carried themselves with the confidence that came from serious training and serious backing. Friends of yours? More like employees, or my father's employees anyway. Her voice had gone flat, defeated. Your father? She nodded, not taking her eyes off the vehicles. James Winters. He owns Winter Global Energy. The name hit Marcus like a physical blow. Even someone who lived as far from the world of high finance as he did knew that name. Winter Global was one of the largest private corporations in the country, with interests in everything from traditional energy to renewable technologies. Forbes had estimated James Winters' personal wealth at somewhere north of $15 billion. You're James Winters' daughter. His only heir, actually. The bitterness in her voice was unmistakable. Lucky me. A knock at the front door interrupted them. Firm, polite, but insistent. The kind of knock that suggested the person on the other side was accustomed to having doors opened immediately. Victoria's shoulders sagged slightly, as if some internal strength was finally giving way. I should go with them. I've caused you enough trouble already. But Marcus was thinking about the phone calls, about the fear in her voice when she'd asked him not to take her to that motel, about the way she'd looked at his family photos with something that might have been longing. Most of all, he was thinking about what Sarah would have done, about the promises he'd made to a dying woman who had believed that people were worth fighting for, even when it was inconvenient. Maybe. His voice was quiet but firm. But maybe not yet. The knocking came again, more insistent this time. A voice called through the door, professional and authoritative. Miss Winters, this is Marcus Thorne with Winter Security. Your father has asked us to escort you home safely. We know you're inside. Victoria looked at him with something that might have been hope beginning to kindle in her eyes. What are you thinking? Marcus smiled, and for the first time since Sarah's death, it felt like the kind of smile that could change everything. I'm thinking that if someone wants to have a conversation with a guest in my house, they can damn well have the courtesy to wait until she's ready. He walked to the front door and pulled it open. The man on the porch was exactly what Marcus expected. Mid-40s, fit, wearing a suit that probably cost more than Marcus's truck, with an earpiece and the careful posture of someone trained to assess threats. Mr. Webb, I presume. I'm Marcus Thorne, head of security for Winter Global. I apologize for the intrusion, but this is a matter of some urgency. I'm sure it is. Marcus blocked the doorway with his body, not aggressive but unmistakably present. But Ms. Winters is a guest in my home, and she'll come out when she's ready, not before. Thorne's expression shifted slightly, recalculating. Mr. Webb, I don't think you understand the situation. Miss Winters' father is very concerned about her safety, and we have authorization to— To what? Enter my property without permission? Because in Pennsylvania, I have certain rights regarding uninvited guests on my land. The two men regarded each other, the working-class veteran and the corporate security professional, each assessing the other's resolve. Finally, Thorne took a small step back. We're prepared to wait on the street, Mr. Webb, but we won't be leaving without Miss Winters. Much appreciated. Marcus closed the door firmly, but not violently. When he turned back, Victoria was staring at him with something approaching awe. No one's ever made them back down before, not even for a minute. I'm not most people. No. Her voice was soft. You're really not. The kitchen phone rang again. This time, when Marcus answered, the voice that filled the room carried the unmistakable authority of serious power. Even through the tiny speaker of the answering machine, the name carried weight. Mr. Webb, this is James Winters. I believe you have my daughter. Marcus and Victoria locked eyes across the kitchen. Everything that had happened in the past 12 hours suddenly crystallized into a single moment of decision. She could leave with a security team, return to whatever life she'd been running from, or she could stay, and together they could face whatever came next. The answering machine continued, James Winters' voice filling the modest kitchen with calculated concern. I want you to know that I appreciate your assistance in keeping Victoria safe last evening. However, she belongs at home where proper security arrangements can be made. I'm prepared to compensate you generously for any inconvenience this situation may have caused. Victoria's face flushed with embarrassment and anger. He's trying to buy you off. I understand that to someone in your position, my daughter may seem like a romantic figure. The voice continued, each word chosen with precision. The poor little rich girl trapped in a gilded cage. But Victoria has responsibilities that go far beyond her personal desires. Thousands of people depend on Winter Global for their livelihoods. My daughter's safety and her eventual succession to the company's leadership are not matters of personal preference. The machine beeped, indicating the message was finished. But almost immediately the phone rang again. This time, James Winters' voice was more direct, cutting through any pretense of politeness. Mr. Webb, I've authorized Mr. Thorne to offer you $75,000 for your assistance in this matter. That should more than cover any inconvenience or lost wages. Please consider your position carefully. Marcus looked at Victoria, whose cheeks were now burning with humiliation. He thinks everyone can be bought. Can they? It was a fair question, and Marcus considered it seriously. $75,000 would pay off a significant chunk of his mortgage, would cover Isaiah's medical bills for the next year, would maybe even let him take a real vacation for the first time since Sarah's death. It was more money than he'd see in bonuses for the next 5 years combined. But then he thought about the way Victoria had looked when she described her life, like a prisoner describing their cell, no matter how golden the bars might be. He thought about Sarah, who had never met a person in trouble she wouldn't try to help. And he thought about the kind of man he wanted Isaiah to remember his father being. No. The word came out simple, certain. They can't all be bought. Something in Victoria's expression shifted, as if she'd been holding her breath and could finally exhale. What are you going to do? First, I'm going to make some coffee. Then I'm going to call my lawyer. Yes, I actually do have one, courtesy of Sarah's estate. And then you and I are going to figure out what you really want. Not what your father thinks you should want, but what you actually want for yourself. Marcus, you don't understand. He's not just rich. He's powerful in ways that can make your life very difficult. He could have the health department shut down your favorite restaurant, have the IRS audit your taxes going back a decade, have the city find violations in your house that require expensive fixes. Maybe. Marcus was already filling the coffee pot with water. But he's also operating in my world now, not his. And in my world, a man's word still means something. A handshake still seals a deal. And when someone asks for help, you don't check their credit score first. Outside, one of the black SUVs started its engine and pulled away. But the other two remained, their occupants settling in for what was clearly going to be a long wait. Through the kitchen window, Marcus could see more vehicles arriving. News vans from stations he recognized, and a few he didn't, their satellite dishes extending skyward like mechanical flowers seeking signal instead of sunlight. And now we have company, Victoria groaned, looking out at the growing media presence. Someone must have recognized the Winter Global vehicles. This is exactly what I was trying to avoid. But Marcus was thinking about something else entirely. The arrival of the media changed the game completely. James Winters might be willing to pressure a working-class veteran in private, but he'd be much more careful about how that pressure was applied if cameras were rolling. Actually, he said, a slow smile spreading across his face, this might be the best thing that could have happened. How do you figure that? Because now we're not having a private conversation anymore. Now we're having a public one. And something tells me that makes all the difference in the world. Victoria studied his face, seeing something there that sparked a flicker of hope. You have a plan? Working on one. Marcus handed her a fresh cup of coffee. But first, I need you to tell me the truth. All of it. No more half answers or evasions. If we're going to do this, I need to know exactly what we're up against. She took the coffee, wrapping both hands around the mug as if drawing warmth from it. For a long moment, she just stood there, wrestling with years of carefully constructed walls and defense mechanisms. Finally, she took a breath and began. The first time I tried to disappear, I was 22, fresh out of Harvard Business School, ready to take on the world. I lasted exactly 6 hours before security found me at a youth hostel in Boston, trying to figure out how to backpack through Europe like a normal college graduate. Marcus listened without interrupting, letting her find her own pace. My father explained very patiently that my personal desires were secondary to my responsibilities, that thousands of employees depended on Winter Global and therefore on me, that I had been born into a position of trust that I couldn't simply abandon because I wanted to find myself. She made air quotes around the phrase, her voice taking on a slightly mocking tone people use when repeating criticism they've internalized. How many times have you tried to leave? This was the 7th. She looked down at her coffee. Each time I've gotten a little farther, stayed away a little longer. I think I'm getting better at it. She attempted a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, though clearly not good enough. What made this time different? Victoria was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the street where the media circus was setting up camp. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. 3 weeks ago, my father had a heart attack. A mild one, the doctor said, but it was a warning. He's 68 and has been working 18-hour days for 40 years. And the board started making noises about succession planning. Marcus saw where this was going, about the need for a smooth transition of power. And I realized I was about to be locked into this forever, not just as his daughter, but as his replacement, CEO of a company I've never wanted to run, making decisions that affect thousands of people, living my life in boardrooms and charity galas and carefully orchestrated public appearances. She looked directly at him. Do you know what it's like to have your every move planned out for you from the moment you wake up until the moment you go to sleep? Marcus thought about his own life, the freedom to decide whether to work overtime or go home early, to choose what to have for dinner, to spend Saturday afternoon reading a book or working in the garden. Simple freedoms that Victoria apparently hadn't known since childhood. The night before I left, there was a gala, another fundraiser, another speech about corporate responsibility and giving back to the community. I stood at that podium looking out at a room full of people who were there because they wanted something from my father, or from me. And I realized I couldn't remember the last time someone had talked to me just because they enjoyed my company. Is that why you were at the gas station? Just trying to be normal for a while? I've been driving for 3 days, paying cash for everything, staying in small towns where no one would recognize me. I was heading for Canada, actually. Thought maybe I could get lost in Montreal for a few months, figure out who I was when I wasn't being James Winters's daughter. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. Stupid, right? Like I could ever really get away from it. Not stupid. Marcus's voice was firm. Human. Something in his tone made her look up sharply, searching his face for mockery or judgment, and finding neither. You don't think I'm just a spoiled rich girl throwing a tantrum? I think you're someone who's been told what to want for so long that you forgot you had the right to want anything different. He leaned back against the counter, studying her. The question is, what do you actually want now? Not what your father thinks you should want, but what you want for yourself. Victoria set down her coffee cup and walked to the window, looking out at the circus assembling on Marcus's quiet street. Media vans, security personnel, curious neighbors, all drawn by the spectacle of a billionaire's daughter hiding in a working-class neighborhood. I want to matter for something other than my bank account. I want to have a conversation with someone who isn't calculating what they can get from me. I want to make decisions based on what I think is right, not what's best for shareholder value. She paused, her voice dropping. And I want to not be afraid all the time. Afraid of what? Of becoming him. Of turning into someone who sees people as assets instead of human beings. Who measures success by stock prices instead of lives improved. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Of waking up one day and realizing I've spent my entire life living someone else's dream. They stood in silence for several minutes, the only sounds the distant murmur of the crowd outside and the occasional car passing on the street. Through the small window, Marcus could see that the media attention had found them despite his hopes. A news van was parking across the street, its satellite dish extending skyward. There's something else. Victoria's voice pulled him back. Something I haven't told you about last night. Marcus waited. Those men who tried to take me, they weren't random kidnappers working for ransom. They were hired. By who? I don't know for certain, but 3 months ago, there was a hostile takeover attempt. A consortium of investors trying to acquire enough stock to force my father out. It failed, but barely. And one of the things they said in their filings was that the company would be more vulnerable after the succession, that I was an untested leader who could be easily manipulated. The implication hit Marcus like cold water. You think someone was trying to kidnap you to destabilize your father's position? Or to send a message about how vulnerable you are without proper security? Either way, it means that disappearing isn't just about my personal freedom anymore. It's about corporate warfare at a level where people get hurt. She looked directly at him. Including you, if you keep helping me. Marcus considered this new information. The idea that he'd stumbled into the middle of a multi-billion-dollar power struggle. It was surreal enough to feel like something out of a movie, except the bruise on Victoria's cheek was very real, and so was the genuine fear in her eyes. What are you going to do? Go back. The words came out flat, defeated. There's no other choice now. I can't keep putting innocent people at risk just because I want something I can never have. And what's that? A normal life. A chance to figure out who I am when I'm not being James Winters's heir apparent. She stood up, her movements decisive despite the sadness in her voice. I should call Mr. Thorne. Tell him I'm ready to come home. But as she reached for her phone, Marcus's hand closed gently over hers, stopping her. Maybe there's another option.
Like what?
Like fighting back. Not by running away, but by taking control on your own terms. His grip on her hand tightened slightly, warm and certain. You said you want to matter for something other than your money. What if we made that happen? Marcus, you don't understand the forces we'd be up against. No, I don't. But I understand something you might have forgotten. He stood, his presence filling the small kitchen with quiet confidence. I understand what it means to fight for something that matters. And I understand that sometimes the best way to win a war isn't to run from the battlefield. It's to choose the ground where you want to make your stand. Victoria stared at him, hope and fear warring in her expression.
What are you suggesting?
I'm suggesting that maybe it's time James Winters' daughter stopped trying to disappear and started making some noise of her own. He smiled, and it carried the conviction of someone who'd made a decision he wouldn't reverse. And I'm suggesting that she doesn't have to do it alone. Outside, the media circus continued to grow, satellite trucks positioning themselves for optimal coverage. But inside Marcus Webb's modest kitchen, something was beginning that none of the reporters or security personnel or corporate executives had anticipated. Something that would challenge assumptions about power and class and what really mattered in life. Victoria's phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, her face going pale as she read the screen. All my accounts, personal and corporate, frozen. She looked up at him, the reality of her father's power suddenly very concrete. I can't access a penny. Your father's first move. Marcus recognized the tactic for what it was. Without funds, she couldn't implement any plans, couldn't even book a hotel room or buy a meal without his approval. She was effectively trapped, dependent on his goodwill for everything. Classic James Winters. Money is the only language he's truly fluent in. Marcus's phone buzzed next. He read the text from his supervisor at Ironwood Steel, his jaw tightening. I've been suspended pending an investigation into possible conflicts of interest and inappropriate conduct. Apparently, someone raised concerns about my relationship with a major stakeholder in the company's financing structure. They looked at each other, both realizing how quickly and efficiently James Winters had moved to isolate them, cut off Victoria's resources, destroy Marcus's livelihood, demonstrate to everyone watching what happened when you got between James Winters and his daughter. The isolation tactic was brutally efficient and completely legal. I should go. Victoria stood abruptly, guilt written across her features. This was insane from the beginning. I can't let him destroy your life just because I was stupid enough to think I could change mine. Sit down. Something in Marcus's tone stopped her mid-step. When she looked at him, she saw not defeat, but determination. The same expression he'd worn when facing down the kidnappers at the gas station. Your father thinks he knows what he's dealing with. He thinks I'm just another person he can buy or break or intimidate into doing what he wants. But he's made one critical mistake, which is, he's fighting this battle like a corporate takeover, all financial pressure and reputation management. But this isn't a boardroom, and I'm not a business competitor. Marcus walked to the window, looking out at the news crews and the lingering security vehicles. In the Army, we called this a hearts and minds campaign. You win by making people believe in what you're fighting for, not by forcing them to submit to what you want. What are you saying? I'm saying your father is playing chess while we should be playing poker. He turned back to her, that slow smile returning. And I'm saying it's time to call his bluff. Before Victoria could ask what he meant, there was a knock at the front door. Not the aggressive pounding of security personnel,
but a polite, measured knock from someone who understood they were asking permission rather than demanding entry.
Marcus opened the door to find a woman in her 50s, professionally dressed, but with the slightly wind-blown look of someone who had been standing outside for a while. Behind her stood a camera crew, but they remained on the sidewalk, clearly under instructions to wait.
Mr. Webb, I'm Carol Martinez from Channel 5 News. I was wondering if you and Miss Winters might be willing to give an interview about your side of the story.
Marcus glanced back at Victoria, who was shaking her head emphatically. The last thing she wanted was more media attention.
But Marcus was thinking about something else entirely, about the difference between reacting to attacks and taking control of the narrative.
Actually, he said to the reporter, I think we might have something to say after all.
Day 3 began before dawn with Isaiah's voice calling from upstairs. Dad, I had a bad dream.
Marcus climbed the stairs to find his son sitting up in bed, face troubled in the dim glow of his nightlight. The dream had been about his mother, about losing her again, the familiar nightmare that still visited despite time's passage. It's okay, buddy. I'm here. Marcus sat on the bed's edge, gathering Isaiah into his arms. Mom's still with us, remember? In here. He tapped Isaiah's chest gently. And in all the good things we do. Is Miss Victoria going to stay? The question caught Marcus off guard. I don't know. Why?
Because she's nice. And you smile more when she's around. Like you used to before Mom got sick. The observation hit Marcus with unexpected force. He hadn't realized how much of his grief he'd been carrying in his expression, in the lines around his eyes and mouth. Hadn't noticed that it was lifting. Get some sleep. We'll figure everything out tomorrow.
Dad? Isaiah's voice was small in the darkness.
Mom would like her. Miss Victoria. I think Mom would want you to be happy.
Marcus's throat tightened. I think she would too, buddy.
After Isaiah fell back asleep, Marcus stood in the hallway for a long moment. His son had just given him permission for something he hadn't even known he was seeking. The weight of it settled over him like a blanket, warm and terrifying in equal measure.
Downstairs, Victoria was still awake, laptop glowing in the darkened living room.
She looked up as he descended, her eyes questioning. Isaiah okay?
Yeah, just a nightmare.
Marcus settled into the chair across from her. About his mom. That must be hard. For both of you.
He said something interesting, though. Said Sarah would have liked you. That she'd want me to be happy.
Victoria's fingers stilled on the keyboard.
The air between them shifted, charging with unspoken possibilities.
And what do you want, Marcus? The question hung there, simple and impossible. Marcus thought about Sarah's 3 promises. Take care of Isaiah. Don't let grief make you hard. Don't be afraid to love again.
I want...
He stopped, searching for words.
I'm not sure I know how to do this anymore. How to let someone in. How to risk losing everything again.
No one's asking you to have all the answers right now.
Victoria closed the laptop, giving him her full attention. We're just trying to get through tomorrow, and the day after that. Everything else can wait. But something in her eyes suggested she hoped it wouldn't wait forever.
The morning brought both promise and crisis, though not in the order Marcus expected. 200 steelworkers showed up at the Red Oak Cafe, filling every seat and spilling onto the sidewalk.
Frank Miller had organized the meeting with the efficiency of someone who'd spent 30 years mobilizing labor, and now he stood at the front of the packed room, his weathered face serious. Most of you know Marcus Webb. Worked at Ironwood for 15 years. Good man, good worker. Now he's partnered with Ms. Victoria Winters here to propose something that could change everything for this town. Frank's voice carried the weight of someone who'd seen too many false promises to get excited easily. I'm going to let them explain it, and then we'll have questions. Real questions, not polite bullshit. Victoria stood, her borrowed laptop connected to a projector that cast their presentation onto the cafe's back wall. She dressed in more of Sarah's clothes, deliberately choosing to look like someone who belonged in this room rather than a boardroom. Thank you all for coming. I know you have every reason to be skeptical. You don't know me, and you've probably heard things about why I'm here that range from partially true to completely fabricated. So let me start with facts. For the next hour, she walked them through the proposal with brutal honesty, the economics of renewable energy transition, the realistic timeline for retraining, the upfront costs and long-term benefits. She didn't sugarcoat the challenges or oversell the opportunities. She treated them like intelligent adults, capable of understanding complex information, and the room responded. Marcus filled in the local context, explaining how their specific skills translated to new industries, how the community center could be transformed, how Millfield's location and infrastructure actually gave them advantages other towns lacked. He spoke their language, understood their concerns, addressed their fears without dismissing them. The questions started cautiously and grew more pointed. How would they choose who got retrained first? What happened to workers too old to learn new skills? Who would own the facility? What guarantees did they have that Winter Global wouldn't pull out after 6 months? Victoria answered each one directly, never deflecting or spinning. When she didn't know something, she admitted it. When the answer was uncomfortable, she delivered it anyway. And slowly, grudgingly, the room began to believe. A woman in her 50s stood up, her ironwood steel jacket worn at the elbows. My husband worked at that mill for 28 years. They let him go last month, and now he sits at home drinking because he doesn't know what else to do with himself. You're telling me there's a way forward for people like him? Yes. Victoria's voice was firm. But it won't be easy. It'll require him to learn new skills, to admit that the industry he knew is dying, to trust that something different can be just as valuable. That's hard, especially after 28 years. But if he's willing to try, we're willing to invest in making it work. The woman sat down, nodding slowly. Around the room, other heads nodded too. Then Frank Miller stood up, his expression unreadable. I've got one question that's going to determine whether this goes anywhere. Mrs. Winters, you're proposing that Winter Global invest $8 million in Millfield. But from what I understand, you're currently not exactly in your father's good graces. So how do you plan to make this happen when you don't even have access to your own bank account? The room went silent. It was the question everyone had been thinking but hadn't wanted to ask. Victoria didn't flinch. You're absolutely right. I don't have access to company funds right now. My father has made sure of that. But I have something more important than money. I have the ability to make this proposal directly to the Winter Global Board of Directors. And if they reject it, I have commitments from 3 impact investment funds willing to provide seed funding for a pilot program. She pulled up a new slide showing letters of intent from major investors, each one bearing the letterhead of firms Marcus vaguely recognized from financial news. This is happening whether Winter Global participates or not. The question is whether they want to be part of something transformative, or whether they want to watch someone else take credit for it. Frank studied her for a long moment, weighing sincerity against decades of broken promises from people in expensive suits. Finally, he nodded slowly. All right then. Let's see what happens. The crowd began to disperse, small groups forming to discuss what they'd heard. Marcus watched them leave, seeing hope kindle in faces that had been resigned to decline.
Whatever happened next, they'd accomplished something today. They'd given Millfield's workers a reason to believe the future might hold more than just managed decline. Back at Marcus's house, Victoria insisted on cooking lunch to celebrate the meeting's success. She'd never cooked without a personal chef before, and the results were predictably chaotic.
How do you burn water? Marcus leaned against the counter, fighting a smile. It's a gift. Victoria stared at the pot like it had personally betrayed her. In my defense, I've never actually used a stove before. Never? We had people for that. She said it without pretension, just stating fact. Then she looked at him, something vulnerable in her expression. Teach me? He stepped behind her, his hands covering hers on the wooden spoon, guiding her movements. The kitchen suddenly felt smaller, warmer. Her hair smelled like the lavender from Sarah's sachets, and he was acutely aware of how close they were standing, of the way her breath caught slightly when his chest pressed against her back. Like this. His voice came out rougher than intended. Slow. Steady. Don't force it. Victoria turned her head slightly, close enough that he could feel her breath against his jaw. I'm not very good at slow. I've noticed. The moment stretched, charged with possibility. Her free hand came up to cover his where it rested on the spoon handle. Neither of them was stirring anymore, just standing there in the small kitchen with the afternoon sunlight streaming through the window and the world outside temporarily forgotten. Marcus. The timer buzzed, shattering the moment. They stepped apart quickly, both slightly breathless, not quite meeting each other's eyes. Pasta's done. Victoria's voice was steadier than she felt. Yeah. Good. They ate lunch in a silence that wasn't quite comfortable, but wasn't entirely awkward either, both processing what had almost happened and what it might mean. Marcus's phone rang while Victoria was clearing dishes. The caller ID showed County Hospital, and his stomach dropped before he even answered. Mr. Webb, this is Dr. Ramesh. We need you to bring Isaiah in immediately. His latest blood work shows concerning changes in his cardiac function. We may need to move up the surgery timeline significantly. The world tilted. Marcus gripped the edge of the counter, knuckles going white. How significantly? Days, not weeks. I'm sorry to spring this on you, but his mitral valve deterioration is accelerating faster than we anticipated. If we don't operate soon, we risk permanent damage to his heart muscle. Or worse. The clinical language couldn't hide the urgency. Marcus forced his voice to remain steady. What's the total cost? The surgery itself is $180,000. We'll need a $50,000 deposit before we can schedule the operating room and surgical team. Given the urgency, we'd need that within 48 hours. $50,000. Marcus had $3,200 in savings, money scraped together over 3 years of overtime shifts and skipped meals. His credit cards were maxed from Sarah's medical bills that had drained everything before she died. The house had barely any equity left after 2 refinances, and he'd just been suspended from his job without pay. I understand. I'll figure something out. He hung up and stared at the phone, his mind racing through impossible calculations. Sell the house? That would take months, even in a good market, and Millfield's real estate had been declining for years. Borrow from Laura. She was a teacher with 2 kids of her own, living paycheck to paycheck like everyone else in this town. The Union Credit Union? They'd already turned him down twice, citing his debt-to-income ratio. Marcus, what's wrong? Victoria's voice cut through the panic spiraling in his chest. He told her, the words coming out mechanical, detached, because if he let himself feel the full weight of it, he'd collapse right there on the kitchen floor. His son needed heart surgery. His son might die without it, and he couldn't afford to save him. Victoria's face went pale. She pulled out her phone immediately, fingers moving across the screen. "I'll transfer." "No." The word came out harder than he intended, sharp enough to make her flinch. "This is Isaiah's life we're talking about." "I know what it is." Marcus's voice was low, strained with the effort of maintaining control. "But if I take your money now, everything changes. Every choice I make from here on out will be questioned. Was it for Isaiah? For the community? Or was it because I was bought and paid for?" "You're being ridiculous." Victoria's frustration broke through her usual measured tone. "This is your son's life, and you're worried about optics?" "I'm worried about who I am." The words burst out louder than he intended. "I'm worried about looking my son in the eye and knowing I compromised everything I believe in. I'm worried about him growing up thinking that principles only matter until things get hard." "So what are you going to do? Just let him die because you're too proud to accept help?" The accusation hit like a physical blow. Marcus turned away, needing to move, to think, to find air that wasn't suffocating him with impossible choices. "I need to make some calls." He walked outside, leaving Victoria standing in the kitchen with her phone still in her hand and tears of frustration building behind her eyes. The October air was cold against his face, clearing his head slightly but offering no solutions. His fingers shook as he dialed Laura's number. She answered on the second ring, and he explained the situation in clipped, clinical sentences. He heard her break down crying on the other end because she didn't have that kind of money either, had barely enough to cover her own family's needs. He called Frank Miller about union emergency funds and learned they'd been depleted helping 3 other families already, that there was nothing left in the coffers. He called the hospital financial office and got transferred 6 times before reaching someone who explained in sympathetic but firm tones that payment arrangements couldn't be discussed until after the deposit was secured, that without the $50,000, the surgery simply wouldn't happen. He was still standing on the sidewalk, phone in hand, staring at nothing, when Mrs. Dorothy Patterson's ancient Buick pulled up to the curb. She climbed out with the deliberate care of someone whose joints protested every movement, walked right up to him, and slapped him across the face. The crack of palm against cheek echoed in the quiet street. "Dorothy, what? That's for being a stubborn fool." Her voice was sharp as broken glass, her eyes blazing with an anger born from love and fear in equal measure. "Sarah Webb was my best friend for 30 years. I watched her fight cancer with everything she had, because she wanted to see that boy grow up. And now you're going to let your pride kill him?" "It's not about pride." "Yes, it is." She grabbed his face between her weathered hands, forcing him to meet her eyes. "It's about your pride mattering more than Isaiah's heartbeat. It's about you being so afraid of owing someone that you'd rather bury your son than admit you need help." The words cut through every defense he'd constructed, every rationalization he'd built. Because she was right. Underneath all his talk about principles and integrity, he was terrified. Terrified of being vulnerable again. Terrified of depending on someone who might leave. Terrified of the debt that could never be repaid. "At some point, Marcus, you gotta decide." Mrs. Patterson's voice softened, her grip on his face gentler now. "Is being able to say you did it alone worth more than having your son alive? Because that's what you're choosing right now. That's the choice you're making while you stand out here on this sidewalk pretending it's about anything other than fear." The truth of it broke something inside him. The wall he'd built between accepting help and maintaining dignity, between independence and isolation, between survival and actually living. He thought about Sarah's 3 promises, about how he'd been so focused on not letting grief make him hard that he'd almost failed the first and most important one.
take care of Isaiah. Everything else was secondary to that. His pride, his fear, his need to prove he could handle everything alone. None of it mattered if Isaiah died because Marcus was too stubborn to accept the help being offered.
He walked back into the house where Victoria stood at the window, her phone still clutched in her hand. She turned as he entered, her expression guarded, braced for another argument. "Transfer the money." His voice was quiet but steady, stripped of everything except necessity. "Please, I'll pay you back. Every penny. It might take me 20 years, but I'll pay you back." "You don't have to." "Yes, I do." He met her eyes, needing her to understand. "That's the only way this works. That's the only way I can live with it. This is a loan, not a gift. We put it in writing, set payment terms, make it official. Because I need to know that I'm not being bought. That when I stand beside you and fight for this community project, it's because I believe in it, not because I owe you my son's life." Victoria studied his face, seeing the cost of what he was asking, understanding the compromise he was making between his principles and his love for Isaiah. She nodded slowly. "Okay. We'll structure it as a formal loan. I'll have my lawyer drop the papers. Market interest rate, 20-year term, payments you can actually afford." She pulled up her phone, fingers moving with practiced efficiency. "But right now, I'm transferring the $50,000 to County Hospital. We can work out the details later." Her fingers moved across the screen, navigating around frozen accounts through backdoor access she'd apparently retained for emergencies exactly like this. Within minutes, she showed him the confirmation screen. "Transfer complete. $50,000 to County Hospital, coded as a personal loan with documentation to follow." "Thank you." The words felt inadequate, too small for what she'd just done, for the lifeline she'd thrown him when he was drowning in impossible choices. "That's what family does." She said it simply, as if it were obvious. Marcus's throat tightened at the word. Family. They'd known each other for 3 days. 3 chaotic, impossible, transformative days that had upended both their lives. And yet the word didn't feel wrong. It felt like something they were building together, something neither of them had quite named yet, but both recognized. "I should call the hospital, get Isaiah scheduled. I'll call my lawyer about the loan documents." They moved in opposite directions, each making calls that would bind them together in ways that went far beyond money. Marcus spoke with Dr. Ramesh, who confirmed that Isaiah could be scheduled for surgery in 2 days, that the deposit had been received, that everything was moving forward. The relief that washed over him was so intense, it was almost painful. Victoria spoke with her personal attorney, a woman who'd handled her affairs for a decade, and asked no questions when Victoria requested loan documents drawn up immediately. Professional to professional, understanding that sometimes the details mattered less than the urgency. When they finished their calls, they stood in the living room looking at each other. The afternoon sunlight slanted through the windows, casting everything in golden tones. Outside, the street was quiet, the media circus having moved on to other stories. For the first time in days, they were alone, with no immediate crisis demanding their attention. "I need to pick up Isaiah from school." Marcus checked his watch. "Take him to the hospital for pre-op tests. It's going to be a long afternoon. Do you want me to come with you?" The offer surprised him. "You don't have to." "I know, but maybe I want to." Something in her expression made him realize this was about more than just supporting him. She wanted to be there, wanted to meet his son properly, to be part of this next chapter, wanted to show him that her commitment extended beyond business proposals and community development plans. "Okay, yeah, that would be good." They drove to the elementary school together, arriving just as the final bell rang and children poured out like water released from a dam. Isaiah emerged near the middle of the pack, his backpack bouncing against his shoulders, his face lighting up when he saw his father's truck. Then he noticed Victoria in the passenger seat, and his expression shifted to something more cautious, more assessing. "Hey, buddy," Marcus greeted him as he climbed into the back seat. "Remember Miss Victoria from the other night?"
"Hi, Isaiah." Victoria turned to face him, keeping her tone warm but not overbearing. "Your dad's told me a lot about you."
"He talks about you too." Isaiah's directness was pure 8-year-old honesty. "He says you're helping fix the town and that some people are mad about it." "That's true. Change makes people nervous sometimes." "Are you really a billionaire?" Victoria almost laughed at the blunt question. "My family has a lot of money, yes, but that's not the most interesting thing about me." "What is?" "I'm trying to figure that out, actually. For a long time, I let other people define me by how much money I had. Now I'm working on being defined by what I do with it instead." Isaiah considered this with the seriousness only children can bring to philosophical questions. "My mom used to say that who you are is what you do when nobody's watching, not what you say or what you have, what you actually do." The wisdom of it, delivered in a child's piping voice, struck Victoria with unexpected force. "Your mom sounds like she was a very wise person." "She was the best." Isaiah's voice carried the simple certainty of a child's love. "Dad says she's still with us, though. In here." He tapped his chest, where his damaged heart beat its irregular rhythm. "And in the good things we do." Marcus met Victoria's eyes in the rear-view mirror, and something passed between them. An understanding, an acknowledgement of the weight his son carried and the grace with which he carried it. At the hospital, Isaiah endured the pre-op tests with practiced patience. Blood draws, chest x-rays, an echocardiogram that showed his mitral valve struggling to close properly with each heartbeat. Dr. Ramesh explained the surgery in terms an 8-year-old could understand, using models and diagrams, never talking down but never overwhelming either. Victoria watched Marcus through it all, seeing the fear he tried to hide, the way his hands clenched when the doctor explained the risks, the careful control he maintained for Isaiah's sake. And she saw Isaiah watching his father too, reading the tells that only a child who'd already lost one parent could recognize. After the tests, while Marcus handled paperwork at the administrative desk, Isaiah approached Victoria in the waiting room. She was surprised when he sat down beside her, his legs not quite reaching the floor, swinging slightly. "Are you going to stay?" He asked the question quietly, as if afraid of the answer. "At the hospital? Of course. I want to make sure you're— No, I mean after. Are you going to stay with us?" Victoria's breath caught. She looked at this small boy who'd been through so much, who'd lost his mother and now faced surgery that carried real risks, who had every reason to be scared, but was instead worried about his father's happiness. "I'd like to, if that's okay with you." Isaiah studied her face with the frank assessment that children excel at, looking for dishonesty or hidden motives. Whatever he saw seemed to satisfy him. "Okay. But you should know that Dad gets sad sometimes, about Mom. And that's okay. You don't have to fix it or make it go away. You just have to be there." The emotional intelligence in that statement, the understanding of grief's permanence and the role new love could play without erasing old pain, was staggering from an 8-year-old. "I can do that. And you can't mess with Mom's stuff in the sewing room. That's important." "I won't. I promise." "Okay then." Isaiah hopped down from the chair. "I think you're nice. And I think Mom would think so too." He walked back to his father, leaving Victoria blinking back tears in the hospital waiting room, overwhelmed by the casual acceptance from a child who'd just given her something precious, permission to be part of his family. That evening, after Isaiah was in bed early per doctor's orders, Marcus and Victoria sat on the porch swing, watching the sun set behind the mountains. The signed loan documents sat on the table between them, official and binding. $50,000 at 4.5% interest, payments of $300 per month for 20 years. You could have just given it to me. Marcus's voice was quiet. Made it a gift. I know, but you needed it to be a loan. And I needed you to know that I respect why that matters to you. Do you think I'm crazy? Insisting on paying you back when you have more money than you could spend in 10 lifetimes? Victoria was quiet for a moment, choosing her words carefully. I think you're someone who knows that how you do something matters as much as what you do. And I think that's exactly the kind of person I want standing beside me when we try to change the world. They sat in silence, the porch swing creaking gently as it moved. Somewhere down the street, children played in a yard, their laughter carrying on the evening air. Normal sounds from a normal neighborhood where normal people lived normal lives. Except nothing about this was normal anymore. I'm scared. Marcus's admission came quietly. About the surgery. About losing him. About... He stopped, unable to voice the rest. About me? About letting myself feel something for someone again. About taking that risk when I barely survived losing Sarah. Victoria reached for his hand, lacing her fingers through his. I'm scared too. About the board meeting in 3 days. About my father's next move. About whether I'm strong enough to actually build this new life I keep talking about. She squeezed his hand. But I'm less scared when I'm with you. And that has to count for something. Marcus turned to look at her fully, seeing her in the fading light. Victoria Winters, billionaire heiress, sitting on his modest porch wearing his dead wife's clothes and holding his hand like it was the most natural thing in the world. Isaiah gave you his blessing today. Did you know that? I suspected. He's very direct. He gets that from Sarah. She never believed in talking around things. Marcus's thumb traced patterns on the back of Victoria's hand. She made me promise before she died. 3 things. Take care of Isaiah. Don't let grief make me hard. And don't be afraid to love again when the time came. And has it? Come, I mean. Instead of answering with words, Marcus leaned forward and kissed her. Gentle, questioning, giving her every chance to pull away. But she didn't. She leaned into it, her free hand coming up to cup his jaw, her lips soft and warm, and tasting faintly of the coffee they'd shared after dinner. When they pulled apart, both slightly breathless, Victoria rested her forehead against his. That was... yeah. We should probably talk about... later. Right now, I just want to sit here with you and pretend the world's not about to get a whole lot more complicated. So they did. They sat on the porch swing until the stars came out, until the streetlights flickered on, until the temperature dropped enough that they should have gone inside, but didn't. Because for these few hours, they could just be Marcus and Victoria, 2 people finding something unexpected in the middle of chaos, building something neither of them had planned but both desperately needed. Tomorrow would bring Isaiah's surgery and all its terrifying possibilities. The day after would bring James Winters and the board meeting and the battle for Millfield's future. But tonight, they had this. And somehow, impossibly, it felt like enough.